As the host's voice faded into the background, the reason behind those fleeting glances finally became clear to me. Davis, who was supposed to be the best man, stood in the spotlight waiting for the bride to make her slow walk toward him. The floral scent in the air made my head spin, and the drumbeats in the background seemed to mirror the rapid thumping of my heart. Thump, thump. I watched as the man who had confessed his love to me just the day before now held the bride's hand, kissing her in front of everyone. Half the guests were focused on them, while the other half's eyes shifted toward me. In this moving, beautiful ceremony, my expressionless face stood out, a glaring contrast. I felt like a complete fool. During the wedding speech, Davis thanked the guests, his friends, and his parents. The moment he finished, his gaze turned toward me. "Rebecca, I've thought about this long and hard, and I've decided to say this to you now during the wedding." I froze, noticing out of the corner of my eye that his friends had positioned themselves near me, as if afraid I might storm the stage and ruin everything. "Thank you for being by my side all these years, but I'm sorry. The woman I want to marry is someone else." His words were like a slap in the face, and the bride next to him started tearing up. They gazed at each other, lost in their own little world. I snapped out of it and realized I should have walked away long ago. But when I tried to move, my body felt frozen, weighed down by the tension that had built up. I knew that, by sitting back down among the guests, I had become the center of their whispers, but I refused to let anyone see me falter. I steeled myself as best I could. Then I heard the bride begin her speech. "Rebecca, I'm sorry we had to meet like this." It took me a few seconds to process her words, and when I finally looked up, my confusion must have been obvious. "Davis wanted to speak to you earlier, but I stopped him. He's always seen you as a sister, and I was afraid he might say something wrong that would hurt your feelings." Claire went on and on, thanking me for things I barely heard, all while I tried to push the ache in my chest down and smile weakly, wishing them well. Half the people around me were familiar faces, their gazes filled with pity, as if they all knew about Claire's presence in Davis's life, while I'd been kept in the dark, like a fool. When I finally felt steady enough to stand, I grabbed my phone and began to leave. Someone behind me called out, "Hey, you forgot your bag?" I thought to myself, that bag was a gift from Davis, one I never wanted to touch again. The noise of the wedding faded away as I stepped through the doors, and as the sunlight hit my face, the forced smile I had been wearing finally crumbled. "You look terrible. Anyone would think you just attended a funeral." I turned in surprise only to find Evan leaning against his car, a cigarette dangling from his mouth. Amid my chaotic thoughts, I remembered why Evan hadn't gone inside. He was allergic to pollen. "Want to leave? I can give you a ride." Without thinking, I changed direction and climbed into the passenger seat of his car. Evan didn't ask where I wanted to go, he simply pressed the gas, and his sports car shot forward like a rocket. My anger, hatred, and all the negative emotions I'd been carrying quickly shifted to fear as I realized just how fast we were going, how close we might be to crashing. By the time Evan finally stopped, my mind was clear of those troubling thoughts. My hands were shaking as I unbuckled my seatbelt, and when I opened the door, my legs gave way beneath me and I collapsed to my knees. "Did you really just attend a funeral?" Evan asked, crouching down in front of me. I didn't need to look at myself to know how pale my face must have been, as if I'd seen a ghost. "I'm not ready to die yet," I muttered, my voice shaky. "Were you trying to catch a flight or rushing to your next life?" Evan gently wiped away a tear from my eye. Only then did I realize I'd been crying out of fear. In that moment, it hit me, Evan's expression told me everything. He was interested in me. I wasn't bad-looking, and my figure wasn't too shabby either. Sitting on the ground in a tight dress, tears in my eyes, I couldn't help but think it was hard for any young man not to feel something, especially after what had just happened at the wedding. It was as though my pride had built a wall around me, but without hesitation I blurted out what had been on my mind. "Do you need someone by your side right now?" I changed my words, not wanting to seem like I was overstepping. Evan gave me a look, one that was darker than I expected, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he helped me to my feet, brushing the dirt off my legs. Then, in one smooth motion, he scooped me up into his arms. Afraid of falling, I instinctively wrapped my arms around his neck. It felt so natural, as if this was how things had always been between us. I was too busy looking around to notice his slight pause when he spotted something. A plane was parked nearby. Recalling my earlier accusation, I couldn't help but feel a little amused. From the moment I boarded the plane until it took off, about 40 minutes passed. I didn't ask where we were headed. Evan handed me a bag of clothes, and with the help of a beautiful flight attendant, I took a shower aboard the plane. Strangely, once I got into Evan's car, my thoughts of Davis seemed to vanish completely. I even found myself admiring this so-called billionaire's toy. Before everything fell apart for my family, our status had been on par with Davis's. I was considered wealthy in my own right, so I wasn't easily impressed by material things. But Evan's family was in a league of their own. If it weren't for Evan's grandfather, who had been a mentor to our parents' generation, Davis and I would have never met. After my shower, my mind began to clear, but then the reality of what had happened hit me. I had practically offered myself to Evan and a wave of shame rushed over me. I almost forgot how to breathe. "Are you planning to camp in there?" Evan knocked on the door and I slowly opened it, avoiding his gaze. "Are you really that heartbroken over Davis's wedding?" he asked. Noticing my silence, his expression grew darker. His assumption shocked me and I shook my head vigorously. "Who's thinking about him?" "I was thinking about you." The room went completely silent the moment I spoke. I closed my eyes, regret piling on top of regret. I wished I could vanish from the world right then and there. Suddenly, I felt the warmth of another person's lips on mine. Evan's voice was low as he pulled back slightly. "I've been waiting years to hear you say that." I was so caught up in trying to figure out what he meant that I didn't even notice I had instinctively responded to his kiss. Evan paused, pulling back just enough to make eye contact. His gaze was intense. "Is this okay?" If I hadn't been so close, I might have missed his whisper. I felt something wet at the corner of my mouth and instinctively licked my lips. I noticed Evan's Adam's apple bob as he watched me. After a moment's thought, I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him again. When I felt resistance, I stopped. Evan held me there for what felt like forever. By then, I was half dead from the torment, whimpering, begging him to let me go. "Let you go?" he murmured. "You'll never leave my side for the rest of your life." I had no idea how long the flight lasted. The ups and downs made it feel like an eternity. I couldn't remember how I got off the plane, but when I woke up, the first thing I saw through the window was greenery outside, with a giraffe casually walking among the trees. If it weren't for the arm wrapped around my waist, I would have thought it was all just a dream. As I shifted, I felt sore all over, like I had just run a marathon. I gently moved Evan's arm aside and slowly got up to wash up in the bathroom. Halfway through brushing my teeth, the bathroom door suddenly swung open. The moment Evan saw me, his expression softened, and he let out a sigh of relief. His bare chest bore faint red marks, and in my distraction, I accidentally swallowed some toothpaste foam, nearly gagging. "Looks like we haven't done enough," Evan said, and my face instantly turned bright red. By the time we sat down for breakfast, I still didn't want to speak to him. "I'll take you to meet some people later," Evan said as I finished my meal. I looked at him, confused, but he remained cryptic, refusing to tell me who we were meeting. I assumed it was just a few of Evan's friends. But when I walked into the room and saw his parents and grandfather, I felt like I could have disappeared into the floor. I pinched Evan's thigh hard, and to his credit, he didn't flinch. Instead, he casually wrapped his arm around me and introduced me to his family. "This is the person I'm going to marry." Of the 5 people present, I was the most shocked by his words. Just yesterday, Evan and I were little more than acquaintances, and after only one night, no matter how intimate that night had been, it seemed completely absurd for a wealthy heir like him to casually decide on a marriage partner. Why was I the one involved? I was only hearing about this now. I felt like I was still dreaming. It was only thanks to the lessons I had learned growing up that I managed to remain polite while conversing with Evan's family. His parents were regulars on financial magazines and billionaire rankings. I had expected them to be difficult to get along with, but after Evan introduced me, they both smiled warmly. His grandfather, who already knew me, was even more welcoming. He smiled at me, but when he turned to Evan, his expression turned stern. "It took you this long to win my granddaughter-in-law back? How useless," he remarked. I blushed at his sudden comment, and Evan even agreed with him. "It's my fault. I listened to you and focused on my studies, letting someone else take her first." Over the course of the meal, I learned that Evan had spoken about me to his family a long time ago. His grandparents were both professors, and their family followed strict rules. Evan's parents were busy with work, so he grew up with his grandparents and was very obedient. He had planned to confess to me after graduation, but Davis and I had become a couple during our sophomore year. If it hadn't been for my parents' tragic accident the year I graduated, Davis and I would have been engaged by now. At the end of the meal, Evan's mother asked for my contact information. It was only then that I remembered my phone had long since died back at Evan's estate. As I plugged it in to charge, I found myself wanting to talk to him about our relationship. While I was trying to figure out how to bring it up, my phone buzzed nonstop. Evan sat across from me, his gaze fixed on the screen, lost in thought. I could see there were countless missed calls and messages. Without needing to check, I knew they were all about Davis's wedding. Evan, why did you take me to meet your parents? Even though his actions had already spoken volumes, I still wanted to hear him say it. Why did he bring me to another country after I had been publicly humiliated and introduce me to his family? What do you think? Evan replied, leaning back in his chair. The backlight made it hard to read his expression clearly. I didn't respond right away, my thoughts running wild but my rational side holding me back from saying something impulsive. Looks like I haven't done enough, Evan continued. Sorry, this is my first time in a relationship. If I'm doing something wrong, you need to tell me. I stared at him, still processing his words. He suddenly stood up, one hand resting on the back of my chair while the other took my phone. Before I could fully react, Evan answered the call. Turned out he had noticed someone was trying to reach me. He was so close that I could see the small mole on his eyelid. In that moment, I didn't mind at all that he was answering my phone without asking. Normally, I was very protective of my personal space, but with Evan, it felt different. The person on the other end seemed surprised that the call had actually gone through and hesitated before speaking. The phone was on speaker, and I reluctantly tore my gaze from Evan's face to see who was calling. It was Davis's mother. Rebecca, is that you? You finally answered. She had always been kind to me. She and my mother were classmates and as close as sisters, but just the day before, at the wedding, she had been one of the onlookers. What do you want? My voice was cold, distant. I had once considered her a second mother, but now, I felt nothing but bitterness. There was a long pause on the other end, and just when I thought the call had ended, I heard her sobbing. Rebecca, I'm sorry for what happened to you, for putting you through this. Her words were laced with emotion, but the irony of it all didn't escape me. She sounded like she had been the one betrayed, not me. Out of respect for our past, I didn't interrupt her. She went on to explain that their family's business was struggling, and they had no choice but to arrange the marriage between Davis and Claire. She begged for my forgiveness and asked me to keep everything quiet, not letting rumors spread. I was confused, not fully understanding her reasoning. Evan, who had been silent up until then, spoke up. Did you really think she was an easy target just because she's an orphan? You know exactly what you did. His voice was clear, authoritative, and anyone who knew him would have recognized it. I could hear the conviction in his tone, and something in me stirred. The call ended abruptly, Davis's mother hanging up quickly, likely out of guilt or fear. While you were sleeping, I had someone look into them, Evan said calmly. The rumors going around? Those are mine too. I glanced at him, confused. What do you mean? Evan continued. I deliberately ignored your pause when you were asleep. His voice had a sharp edge to it, and I didn't know how to process it. I took my phone back and opened Instagram. The notifications flooded in, many of them from yesterday's wedding. It hadn't been a large event, but half the guests were strangers. Someone had posted a video of the ceremony with a sensational caption. Best man becomes groom. Cheating scumbag brings ex-fiancée to his own wedding, publicly friend-zoning her in front of everyone. The comments were a mix of disbelief and declarations of lost faith in love. As I watched the video again, hearing Davis and Claire's words, I felt surprisingly calm. Davis and I had been together for over 20 years. We'd been through thick and thin, and everyone said we were a perfect match. But now, here I was, watching the man who had promised to love me forever betray me in the cruelest way. Evan's voice broke through my thoughts. I was bluffing earlier, but your family's downfall might not have been an accident. His words hit me like a slap. Thinking back to Davis's mother's reaction, something didn't sit right. I remembered how devastated I had been when my parents passed and how our family business started crumbling right after their funeral. My eyes welled up, That period had been so dark that I almost didn't make it through. Davis had been my lifeline, but now I was left questioning everything. Had his kindness been nothing more than an act? Had I been living a lie all this time? "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you back then," Evan said softly, his voice full of regret. "If I had been, I would have uncovered any foul play." Evan had suddenly gone abroad during his 3rd year of college and hadn't returned until last year. How could I possibly blame him for that? He sat down beside me and pulled me onto his lap. Davis and I had been together for years, yet aside from the occasional kiss, we had never taken our relationship further. I had questioned his love because of it, but he always claimed that he respected me too much to push for more. What happened with Evan yesterday felt like a reckless act of self-abandonment in the heat of the moment. Even though we had become more intimate, I still felt a bit uncomfortable and shifted slightly. "Stop moving," Evan's voice was hoarse. Realizing what was happening, I froze, not daring to move. Evan gently kissed behind my ear. "Don't worry. I won't touch you for the next couple of days." I had never noticed how blunt Evan could be. His words distracted me, and I focused on cooling the heat in my cheeks rather than dwelling on the possibility of misdeeds from Davis and his family. Evan's estate was like a small zoo, and worried that I might get bored, he introduced me to each animal and their backstory. I had always noticed that cats and dogs seemed to be drawn to me, but I never expected Evan's larger animals to be so curious as well. When a majestic lion rolled onto its back and allowed me to rub its belly, I felt a pang of envy for Evan's lifestyle. Just as my hand touched the lion's belly, Evan, who had just ended a phone call, scooped me up. "That's a male. Mind the gender," he said, his tone possessive. The lion and I stared at each other, both confused. It took me a moment to realize that Evan was jealous of the male lion. On the 3rd day at the estate, Evan, still worried I might get bored, took me on his private plane to inspect his properties. Under this pretense, he spent the next month whisking me off on trips. By the 5th flight, I realized that he never once let me sit quietly from takeoff to landing. By the end of it, I was almost nauseous at the sight of a plane. During this period, Davis called me more than once. I was caught by Evan the first time I picked up. He glared at me, snatched my phone, and blocked all of Davis's contact information. When another unknown number called, he did the same thing, enjoying it like a game. On the day I returned to the country, Evan dropped me off right outside my door. "I have something urgent to take care of," he said. "Pack your things. I'll come pick you up in a bit." While we were abroad, Evan had told me he wanted me to move in with him once we returned. He had always been willing to accommodate me, but he was particularly firm on this. "I can't sleep without you." After spending a month together, I still couldn't get used to Evan's bluntness. I didn't argue immediately, though, thinking about how he had lived his life up until now. The door lock at the place I was staying had Davis's fingerprint data saved, just in case. Before entering, I deleted his fingerprint and changed the password. Come to think of it, this house had been bought for me by Davis's mother after our family went bankrupt. Now, it should go back to its rightful owner. Most of the things inside the house were bought by Davis and me together. No matter where I stood, memories of Davis flooded my mind. Evan had told me that the investigation into Davis and his family was making progress. My parents' deaths were indeed connected to them. I exhaled deeply at the thought. "When we meet again, we'll be enemies," I whispered to myself, deciding to leave all my memories with Davis behind, except for the ones related to my parents. I packed a few clothes and closed the suitcase. Just as I was about to call Evan and tell him I was heading over, I heard someone at the door. Bang, bang, bang. "Rebecca, I know you're inside. Let's talk." Open the door. It was Davis. Despite his attempt to suppress it, I could hear the anger in his voice. At that moment, I was incredibly grateful for my foresight, but I hadn't expected Davis to come with someone else. I wasn't sure what he had told the person next to him, but when I didn't respond, the door was slammed with a loud crash. I watched in horror as the door slowly began to give way with each strike. I opened my phone and saw a message from Evan on the screen. I called him immediately. The moment the door broke open, Evan finally answered. "Evan, hurry. Come save me." Davis and an unfamiliar man just walked in, and they're holding sticks. "What's going on?" Evan asked, sounding frantic. "Don't be scared. I'll be there soon." "Hide for now," he said, his voice laced with panic. I looked at the malice in Davis's eyes, too terrified to speak. "Rebecca, come here. Let's talk," Davis said, his voice calm, but the look on his face was anything but. I had never seen him like this before. "What's there to talk about?" I didn't understand why Davis was acting this way. Trying to stay calm, I asked, "Why are you here?" Davis tossed the stick he was holding and spoke softly. His voice edged with frustration. "Why are you with Evan? What's your relationship with him?" Davis asked, catching me off guard. I hadn't expected him to bring up Evan so quickly. "Me and him? It's exactly what you think," I replied, my tone sharp like he was trying to catch me in the act. His words made me uncomfortable. "End things with him. Pretend nothing happened. I've already put this house in your name, you can still live here." That was when it hit me. I had never truly understood Davis, not after all these years. "What do you mean by that? You want me to be your mistress?" I shot back, anger seeping into my voice. Davis laughed. "Don't say it like that. Getting married wasn't my choice. Everything I said to you back then, it was all because of Claire's demands. The person I love is you." His words made my stomach churn. Before, Davis had made me feel like the years I spent with him had been a waste. Now he disgusted me. How dare he think that after publicly rejecting me, I would just accept it and stay quiet? Who gave him the nerve? Who gave him the confidence? "Break up with Evan," he demanded. "Whatever happened between you two, I don't care. Be obedient. Stay with me." Davis tried to move closer to me to hug me, but I pulled my arm away and slapped him hard across the face. The man who had come with him raised his phone, pointing it at me and Davis. I had no idea what they planned to do, but instinct told me it couldn't be good. "I've been with you for so many years and never dared to touch you, but now Evan got ahead of me." Davis's voice was low and threatening. "Don't be scared. I'll go easier on you later." Then he took off his shirt. As he wasn't looking, I tried to escape, but the man with the phone grabbed me and shoved me back into Davis's arms. Davis immediately wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my neck. "Let go of me, Davis. If you touch me, I'll kill you," I yelled, my voice trembling. Suddenly, a man's scream pierced the air from the side. Davis froze, turning to see what was happening, but before he could react, several men in black uniforms grabbed him and threw him to the ground. They began beating Davis and the stranger with fists and kicks. I collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down my face. The two men were gradually silenced by the force of the beating. One of the black-clad men approached me, and I instinctively moved back, fear overtaking me. "Sorry, miss," he said, his voice calm. "We got here late. Mr. Evan is on his way. You don't need to be afraid." I finally understood what had happened. Evan always had bodyguards with him, and after dropping me off, he feared something might happen to me. He sent some of his men back, but hadn't expected Davis to slip through the cracks so quickly. When I realized how much Evan cared for me, I wiped my tears and thanked the bodyguards. By the time Evan burst in, I was already sitting on the sofa, trying my best to act normal. He pulled me into his arms, almost suffocating me. "Thank God you're okay. Which hand did Davis touch you with? I'll chop it off and get revenge for you." All my lingering fear vanished the moment he said those words. I looked up at him and kissed his Adam's apple. "Your bodyguards were so quick. I'm fine." Evan released me, cupping my face with both hands and kissing me fiercely. I responded, wrapping my arms around him. I didn't know when exactly, but with Evan by my side, I no longer felt afraid. Davis was thrown at his front door. The bodyguard who had listened in explained that Davis's mother had fainted from shock, and Claire nearly had a miscarriage. The investigation into what happened all those years ago was nearly complete. "I was about to meet with someone who knew the truth when I nearly let you get hurt," Evan said, still in shock. Seeing his somewhat panicked eyes, I couldn't help but comfort him. No one had probably ever seen him like this before. Strangely enough, it was kind of cute. The next morning, an article suddenly appeared on the trending list. The headline read, "Former classmate kills for money, steals family fortune." When I woke up and opened my phone, I saw the topic and furrowed my brows. The article was incredibly detailed, starting by pointing out the suspicious circumstances surrounding my parents' accident, analyzing everything bit by bit. It was only after reading it that I realized just how many hidden secrets there were from back then. Grandfather was a professor of pharmaceutical chemistry, and both my parents and Davis's mother had been his students. Davis's father had been a businessman, but because of his wife's expertise, he had shifted into the pharmaceutical business. Their wealth grew exponentially, helping expand their company. Davis's mother had invited my parents to join their business. At that time, I had already been born. My dad had always wanted a different lifestyle to give me a better future, and that invitation had sparked an idea in him. He gathered some money, and both my mom and dad resigned from their jobs, planning to start their own business. Davis's mom even had an argument with my mom over it. The pharmaceutical industry is highly profitable with a wide variety of products, and my dad, wanting to avoid direct competition with the drugs Davis family produced, began working on other types of treatments. Seeing this, the two families agreed to cooperate, each complementing the other. Once Davis's mom became a wealthy housewife, she stopped being involved in the company's affairs, but my parents continued their research practices. Before the accident, my dad had developed a drug with great effects, though the risks were high. He didn't want to profit from it, and one day, while having dinner with Davis's parents, he casually mentioned it. Davis's dad, always ambitious and eager to save the company during a financial crisis, heard about the drug and became interested. He tried several times to buy the formula from my dad, but my dad refused every time. So, he orchestrated an accident that cost my parents their lives. I had majored in art in college, which had nothing to do with the family business. After my parents died, the company kept facing one disaster after another, most of which had been orchestrated by them. As I read through the article, memories of the house I had once lived in resurfaced. That must have been Davis's mom's guilty conscience trying to compensate me. The article also mentioned the sudden marriage between Davis and Claire. The drug they produced from my dad's formula finally caused a huge scandal. In recent years, there had been a few cases of people falling ill after taking the drug, but they had managed to cover it up by paying people off. This time, however, the number of incidents skyrocketed. Since the company collapsed, I stopped paying attention to the business world. Naturally, I didn't know how much dirty work Davis's family had done to cover up the scandal. Claire's family had some connections, and when Davis's dad was introduced to them, Claire took a liking to him and proposed marriage. She knew that Davis and I had been together for years, but for some reason, she took pleasure in not only refusing to let him break up with me but also forcing him to announce it at the wedding. For the sake of her family's interests, Davis chose to comply. No wonder Davis, who had always restrained himself from expressing love toward me, had clung to me until the day before the wedding, repeatedly telling me he loved me. It made me sick. Suddenly, a hand brushed across my eyes. Evan had woken up. He pulled me into his arms and whispered, "I'm glad you haven't been crying." It was strange, but after learning the truth, I felt strangely calm. I could hardly even feel any anger. "I want to go see my parents now," I said, determined. With the villains exposed, my parents deserved to know the truth immediately. The wind's strong up on the mountain. "Stay in the car for a bit, I'll talk to them alone," Evan said, his tone serious. If I didn't leave, he wouldn't say a word. Reluctantly, I walked out of the cemetery alone. I was almost falling asleep when I saw Evan coming back. "I've been drinking." "You drive us home," he said, clearly a bit tipsy. "You didn't drink with my parents, did you?" I asked. He nodded with his eyes closed. On the way back, I kept asking him what he had said to my parents. He wore a mysterious expression. "This is just a private conversation between me and your parents." "Stop asking," he replied. The day Davis's parents were arrested, I ate more snacks than usual, unable to contain my excitement. Unexpectedly, as I was burping from overeating, Evan made a sudden proposal. "Why today?" I asked, still surprised. "Because you're happy today and I want to make you even happier," Evan said, his voice full of sincerity. His usual blank expression was replaced by one of nervousness and anticipation. I could tell he really understood me. I extended my hand, signaling for him to put the ring on my finger. After he stood up, I gave him a kiss, still tasting the crumbs of chips on my lips. He didn't mind. Davis, who had been uninvolved in the events surrounding his parents, was released after giving his statement. He went around asking where I was living and heard that Claire had slapped him a few times in public. The two of them almost divorced. But I didn't have the time or energy to care about their issues because Evan, in a frenzy, had set our wedding date for the end of the month. There was only half a month left. As a former rich kid, this was the first time I truly felt the power of money. Rumors had circulated that Evan's family was as rich as a country, and now I was seeing that it was no exaggeration. The wedding prep time was short, but Evan did his best to give me everything I wanted. "I thought I had already lost the right to have you," Evan said as we were choosing wedding dresses. A good wedding dress needs to be customized. This was the only thing Evan didn't feel confident about, but I could see the effort he was putting into making this special for me. Evan and I were rushing into a whirlwind wedding. I never imagined that in less than 2 months I would decide to marry the man beside me. My mom had already passed down the most important jewelry to me, and everything else, the dresses, the accessories, felt secondary. As long as you think I look beautiful, that's all that matters. His family had a priceless set of emerald jewelry passed down to the daughter-in-law. The day after Evan proposed, his mom sent it to me, a symbol of her approval, giving me confidence and making me care less about the small details. Evan, always easygoing, agreed that what I said made sense. After trying on several fancy wedding dresses, I was exhausted. Noticing my fatigue, Evan suggested we stop and let me pick the one that felt most like me. Evan had a pollen allergy, yet he insisted on having flowers at the wedding. He even wanted to have them airlifted from overseas. I stopped him right away, fearing that if the flowers were real, I might end up a widow too soon. So I had the flowers replaced with preserved ones. When Evan learned the meaning behind them, he insisted on getting only the finest preserved flowers. I later saw the wedding venue design plans. Evan had the wedding planners create an entire garden with those preserved flowers. The wedding was set to take place in the city where I grew up. Evan said, "I was worried it might be too far and your parents wouldn't be able to attend." I didn't cry when I found out the truth about the past. I didn't cry when I introduced Evan to my parents, and I didn't cry when he proposed. But when he said that, tears overwhelmed me. For the first time, I realized how much I appreciated Evan's blunt honesty. He said exactly what was on his mind, no guessing, no doubts. On our wedding day, many media outlets showed up after hearing about the event. Evan's mom gave them cash, hoping they would capture beautiful photos of the wedding to remember this special moment. Since my parents' passing, I had lost touch with many of my old friends for various reasons. I didn't even know how Evan found their contact details, but when I saw familiar faces in the crowd, I was both shocked and thrilled. I wanted to shout to the world that I was marrying him. Sensing my emotional reaction, Evan leaned in and whispered in my ear. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," I impulsively lifted my veil, grabbed Evan's neck, and kissed him. The laughter from the crowd snapped Evan out of his daze, and he pulled me closer, deepening the kiss. I have no idea who posted the photo of us kissing on Instagram, but I overheard people talking about Davis. I didn't want to hear it, but their voices were too loud. "Did you hear about the photo Joyce took? Someone sent it to Davis. His family's assets were frozen, and just last week, he and Claire moved into a new house. But then Davis cleaned out the place. Claire was so angry she lost the baby." "Yeah, I saw that too." There were crowds outside their house when the ambulance arrived. Davis was just standing there, staring blankly at the wreckage. After the guests had left, Evan came to me, ignoring the curious stares. He reached out to pull me into his arms, but I shot him a few sharp looks. Reluctantly, he let go. When he looked a bit down, I kissed his cheek quickly, and Evan's mood immediately lifted. From this moment on, nothing, no person, no situation would ever make me feel upset again. I just wanted to focus on making this man beside me happy. The end.